Waterloo is the battle by which the Duke of Wellington is defined. His victory there sealed his place in history. It gave him wealth, influence and prestige, and soon propelled him into a new career in politics. But there he would find new battles to fight, political battles, in which even his good name would be at stake. I must have visited the battlefield of Waterloo 30 times, and it never ceases to move me. On the morning of the 18th of June 1815, huge French and Allied armies had drawn up and faced each other across these fields just south of Brussels. 140,000 men were crammed into these 3 square miles. For the Duke of Wellington, this battle was to be the culmination of his military career. Months before, the war had seemed to be over and Napoleon defeated, the result partly of Wellington's victories in Spain and Portugal. But Napoleon had escaped, gathered a vast army around him, and was now marching on Brussels. Wellington had to stop him. It was a battle that would decide the fate of Europe.
Wellington knew that he was at a disadvantage, but characteristically, he gave no sign of it. He'd been cut off from his Prussian allies by the French. He'd taken up a good defensive position on this low ridge, but his army of British, Germans, Dutch and Belgians contained many inexperienced units and was badly outgunned by the French just across the valley.
Napoleon had won the campaign's opening round, but Wellington was a canny defensive general. He waited to see how Napoleon would launch his attack. Wellington regarded the emperor as an opportunist. He was definitely no gentleman. He was a demagogue who'd risen out of the anarchy of the French Revolution, a time of chaos and bloodshed. But he'd masterminded France's conquest of Europe, and the Duke had a high regard for Napoleon's military skills.
He once said, "I would at any time rather have heard that the French army had received a reinforcement of 40,000 men than that he had arrived to take command." And now, for the first time, the Duke and the Emperor were to meet in battle.
At 11:30, Napoleon began the battle with a violent cannonade. This was followed by an attack on a small farm complex, which was in a key position on Wellington's right. It was vital that Wellington didn't lose it.
The enemy commenced a furious attack upon our post at Hougoumont. I had occupied it with a detachment of guards, and it was maintained throughout the day with the utmost gallantry. This was notwithstanding the repeated efforts of large bodies of the enemy.
The British held Hougoumont. Napoleon had wasted the morning. It was not until 1:30 that Wellington had to face the Emperor's main attack. 16,000 infantry advanced against Wellington's centre and the farmhouse, La Haye Sainte, that dominated this part of the field. Although the French failed to take the farm, they surrounded it. broke some Allied troops on the ridge behind and continued to advance. The situation was critical. Wellington ordered in the reserves he'd been keeping for just such a moment, his heavy cavalry. They launched themselves into the greatest cavalry attack in British history. The French infantry were caught in the open, and as the front ranks were hacked down, the survivors fled. "Those terrible grey horses, how they fight," exclaimed Napoleon. However, flushed with success, the British cavalry went out of control, galloping right into the French lines, where they were dashed to pieces. All the while, hundreds of Allied soldiers were being lost to the steady pounding of the French cannon. The battle was reaching crisis point. The Duke relied on the support of the Prussian army, led by Prince Blücher, with whom he had a good working relationship. He watched for signs of the Prussian arrival all afternoon.
Wellington faced certain defeat without his allies. Napoleon had detached troops to delay the Prussians, and by 4 o'clock, Wellington was desperate for Blücher to arrive. His men were already very tired, and now they faced attack from wave after wave of French horsemen.
They formed squares, blocks of men bristling with bayonets, and stood like rocks beneath the torrent. The French swirled round them trying to break through, but volley after volley of musket fire cut them down. The French were helpless in the face of such discipline and determination.
Wellington looked out towards Napoleon almost in disappointment and exclaimed, "Damn the fellow, he is a mere pounder after all." The Duke was everywhere. Mounted on his favorite charger Copenhagen, he rode around encouraging his men, giving meticulous direction to the officers, and taking refuge in the squares when necessary.
But the battle was far from over. At about 6 o'clock, the French once again seemed to gain the upper hand.
The enemy made a desperate effort to force our centre near the farm of Les Saintes. The farm, after a severe contest, was defeated.
Only 42 men from the garrison survived. Losses were appalling. In one regiment of more than 700 men, over 2/3 were killed or wounded. The Duke murmured, "Night or the Prussians must come." Then there was an unexpected lull. The Prussians had finally arrived. Napoleon hesitated over his next move. Half an hour's doubt was undoing a lifetime's achievement. The Duke used the time to reinforce his hard-pressed centre and rally wavering troops.
Hard pounding this, gentlemen. Stand fast. We must not be beat.
At 7:30, Napoleon finally decided to order France's crack troops to advance.
The Allies could hear the drums and yells of "Vive l'Empereur!" as Napoleon's Imperial Guard, his last reserve, came up this slope over the debris of previous attacks.